Hello, my name is Allison Carmen, and welcome to my podcast, 10 Minutes to Less Suffering. Today, I'd like to talk about relationships. I don't really want to talk about relationships themselves. I want to talk about how we approach our relationships. Just like anything in life, there are certain relationships we enjoy more than others. There are some relationships that are easy, and there are some relationships that are more difficult. Some relationships we choose, sometimes it's family members, sometimes it's people at work. But what happens over time is that we accumulate experiences with people. And because we accumulate experiences, we come to each interaction with each person with memories. And if we've had tough interactions with people or difficult experiences with them, sometimes we don't come to the moment with a clear slate. Another thing that often happens is that we can come to a relationship still bogged down by past experiences that had nothing to do with that person. So often when we show up for an interaction, we show up for work, we show up for our husband, our wife, our boyfriend, girlfriend, we're showing up with our past and we're showing up with everything that's happened before this moment with that person in front of us. And sometimes we have a lot of good memories and we have pleasant thoughts about certain things, and we come to a relationship and we're open and we're giving and we're sharing. But sometimes things set us off. The person could say something to us that we interpret the wrong way or we interpret the right way. But unless we're willing to show up with a clear mind in the moment, it's a lot of baggage to bring to every moment of our lives. We don't give things space. We don't give problems and situations with people the benefit of the doubt because we become so sure we know over a period of time what's happening, what that person's thinking, what we're thinking. And sometimes we just end up being combative and angry, and there's fighting and there's conflict, and these relationships end or they're painful, or we never reach good resolutions or compromises. And again, this could happen at work, this could happen in your personal life, because there's no space between what happens and what we think about what happens. And for me, the thought that gives me space is the idea of maybe. And I know I've spoken a lot about maybe, about using it for uncertainty and self doubt, but this little word creates a space and a new possibility for each relationship so we could show up new to each moment. And it reminds me actually of a story when I was a little girl. I must have been about 8 years old and I was on a school bus. And there was a girl named Stephanie who I'd sit with every day, and we'd laugh and we'd joke, and I always look forward to riding the bus in the morning. And one day when I was sitting on the bus, my nose started to run. Now, this is not my best moment, but I'm going to share it to prove a point. It was winter time. I had no tissue, I had no pocket, and I became very nervous that Stephanie, the other children on the bus, would see my nose running. And I was wearing a hood. So I remember I chose at that moment to move my head to the left to wipe my nose on my hood. Like I said, not my best moment. Could be a little gross to some people that are listening. But again, I was 8 years old, and I got off the bus, and the next day Stephanie stopped speaking to me. And she was rude, and she was a little bit of a bully. She didn't want to sit with me anymore. She would insult me when she had the opportunity. And I couldn't imagine what happened. I couldn't imagine what I did for her to treat me that way. And I never said anything to Stephanie. I never asked her. I assumed she just stopped liking me and she didn't want to be friends anymore. And I remember every morning on the bus, I was upset. And then finally, at the end of the year, she got on the bus and there was no place else to sit but next to me. And I remember when she sat down next to me, I asked her, "Are you mad at me? Because you haven't been nice to me." And she looked at me and said, "The reason why I'm not nice to you anymore is because you made a face at me that day when I was talking to you. You turned your head and made this horrible face, and I felt you were making fun of me." I laughed because it was a really funny moment. At that moment, I had a choice, right? I could say, "Okay, I'm sorry," or I could out myself that I did something maybe that was possibly a little gross at the moment. And I was honest with her. I said, "That's not true." I started to laugh. I said, "My nose is leaking," and I turned my head to wipe it on my hood. And she started to laugh. And from that day on, we were friends again. And I think about that sometimes because what a misunderstanding. Neither of us had, maybe she didn't turn around to me and said, "Why'd you just make a face at me?" And I never bothered to ask why a friend out of nowhere would stop speaking to me and actually be mean. And I know it's a story of two 8-year-olds, but this carries on to all parts of our lives. I remember I had a client and I helped him purchase another company, and I thought I did a really great job. And after the deal closed, I never heard from him again. He paid my bill, and I remember being a little hurt. I didn't understand why he didn't send me any more business. But I thought to myself, I did a good job, and why should I call him? And it turns out 6 months later, he called me. He had gotten sick, he had cancer. And I think about that. I was not there for him. And we still work together today, but I think about that I had no maybe. What if at that moment where I said, oh, he didn't call me, he's not grateful for all the hard work that I did for him? What if I gave that moment the benefit of the doubt? What if I said maybe? What if I asked myself, are you absolutely sure that statement's true? I was not sure that he wasn't appreciative. I had no idea. Had I engaged in maybe, I could have said to myself, maybe he's happy and he has no work. Maybe there's something wrong. And I think I would have gotten to the place where I would have said, maybe I could give him a call. And I would have been in touch with him and I could have supported him when he was ill. I find this also happens a lot with marriages and romantic relationships and friendships. We have to be careful that we're so busy to jump to know what the other person in front of us is thinking. And the truth is, we don't know. And yes, sometimes when we ask, well, someone might be mean or rude to us twice, but the possibility that we can heal a relationship or not have conflict or grow or expand is one of the most important things we could do in life. I can't tell you how many times I've had a client who was so sure their boss hated them, and 6 months later, they got a raise. Or they were so sure they were doing a bad job, and then they got a good review. Now, I realize you can't always run to your boss every minute and say, how am I doing? But you can engage in maybe. And in that situation, it might be that you don't get to speak to the person, but you lighten your own load by being in maybe. Because you realize that maybe I am doing a good job. And maybe my boss is curt because he's busy, or maybe that's how he is. But until I know, until someone gives me a bad review or until I get fired, I need to stay in maybe. Sure, I could work hard and maybe I want to do a better job and maybe I want to learn more. But before anybody says anything to you, the best place to be is take a pause and be in maybe and save yourself a lot of aggravation. So sometimes we get to think about the idea of maybe and speak to the person about it. And sometimes we need to hold the idea of maybe until the situation with someone else resolves. Maybe is a pause. And it's a moment where we allow ourselves to say, hey, maybe I don't know what's going on here. Maybe I don't know what the other person is thinking. Maybe something else is going on. And it just allows us to sit in a more expansive place with somebody else. And sometimes that's all a relationship needs. Sometimes things get so tense and there's so much conflict that we start to believe that the person in front of us is against us when they are our ally. But we forget this because of the past, and we forget this because of the tension, and we forget this because of all the assumptions we're making about what we think we know. So it maybe allows us not to know. And within not knowing, we sometimes reach the truth that the person in front of us loves us and cares about us, and there's something else that's going on. And again, that's not always the case, but sometimes it is, and it's so worth exploring. Because who wants to live in conflict? And who wants to not reach their full potential with every human being that they meet? And who wants to have conflict at work and worry and stress when we could just live in this open space where we allow ourselves to come to the moment and realize that there's a possibility that we're misunderstanding what's happening. And through asking ourselves maybe, we'll come up with a better solution. And maybe sometimes we'll say something, maybe sometimes we won't. But the truth is we're going to have better relationships in our lives because we're going to spend more time assuming less, communicating more, and finding a more kind, loving place for all of our relationships to blossom. So thank you for listening to this podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you could email me at allison@allisoncarmen.com. If you'd like to read my book, The Gift of Maybe, it's available at all major bookstores and online retailers.